Your Honor, my client built the empire, my husband's attorney announced, gesturing toward Daniel with the theatrical flourish of someone who'd clearly practiced this speech in the mirror. He founded Thornton Capital Partners. He closed the deals. He made the strategic decisions that grew a $500,000 investment into a $23 million portfolio. His wife, meanwhile, organized dinner parties and redecorated the house. The attorney, a man named Bradley Morrison who'd made his reputation destroying women in divorce proceedings, smirked at me across the courtroom as if I were already defeated. She was just a housewife. She gets nothing beyond what the prenuptial agreement specifies, $200,000 and the contents of her closet. My husband Daniel nodded along, confirming every word, 15 years of marriage reduced to a dismissive wave as he denied I'd contributed anything of value to his success or our life together. I said nothing, not because I was defeated but because I was waiting for Judge Patricia Holloway to call the recess I knew was coming, waiting for her to review the financial disclosure I'd submitted under my maiden name. Waiting for the moment when the man who'd called me just a housewife would discover that his wife had quietly built something far larger than his empire while he wasn't paying attention. The judge called a 30-minute recess. When court resumed, everything changed. Let me tell you about the housewife who built a fortune and the husband who never noticed. I married Daniel Thornton when I was 26 years old. He was 32, handsome, ambitious, and convinced that his destiny was to become a major player in finance. I was a junior analyst at a commercial real estate firm, quietly building expertise while he chased the spotlight. Daniel didn't know much about my work. He knew I had a job, knew I earned enough to pay my share of our dating expenses, knew I was smart about buildings in some vague way that never required further investigation. What he didn't know was that I was already making my first investment. A small strip mall in a transitional neighborhood, purchased for $340,000 with a down payment I'd scraped together over 4 years of saving. The property was ugly, half-vacant, and located in an area everyone said was too risky. I saw potential. I was right. The strip mall tripled in value within 5 years. By then, I was married to Daniel, pregnant with our first child, and transitioning out of the workforce because he decided that his wife didn't need to work. His business was growing, his ego was expanding, and he wanted a partner who enhanced his image rather than competed for professional attention. I negotiated carefully. I want to keep my investments, I told him. The properties I already own, the accounts in my name. They're small compared to your work, but they're mine. He agreed without much thought. My holdings at that point were worth maybe $800,000, significant to me, negligible to a man building what he called an empire. He was happy to let me have my hobby as long as I focused on being the wife he wanted. I became that wife. On the surface. For 15 years, I played the role perfectly. Dinner parties for his clients. Charity galas where I smiled on his arm. The beautiful home that showcased his success. 3 children raised with attention and care while their father worked 18-hour days and took credit for a family he barely participated in. I did all of it. And I did something else too. My hobby grew quietly behind the scenes. The strip mall became 2 strip malls. Then an office building. Then a portfolio of commercial properties across 4 states, all purchased under my maiden name, Evelyn Crawford, through an LLC that Daniel never bothered to investigate. I had separate attorneys, separate accountants, separate everything. My investments generated cash flow that I reinvested, building and building while Daniel assumed my financial life consisted of household budgets and shopping trips. By year 10 of our marriage, my holdings were worth $18 million. By year 15, they'd reached $47 million. I was wealthier than my husband. He had no idea. The marriage deteriorated predictably. Daniel's success bred arrogance, and his arrogance bred distance. He started working longer hours, taking more business trips, treating me with the particular dismissiveness of someone who forgotten I was a person rather than an accessory. Then came the affair. His secretary, a cliché so complete I almost admired his lack of creativity. 28 years old, impressed by his money, willing to tell him he was brilliant without the context of having watched him for 15 years. I discovered it through credit card statements, charges at jewelry stores, hotels, the expensive restaurant where he'd once taken me on our anniversary but hadn't visited with me in years. I said nothing. I started planning. The divorce filing came from his side. Daniel wanted out cleanly, wanted to move on with his new life, wanted to minimize what I received in the process. His attorney, Bradley Morrison, was famous for exactly this kind of work, high net worth divorces where the husband needed to protect assets from a wife who contributed nothing. They assumed I was what I appeared to be, a housewife with no income, no separate assets, nothing but the prenuptial agreement that limited my payout to $200,000 and personal property. They never checked. The courtroom battle began predictably. Daniel's legal team presented him as the sole architect of the family's wealth. His testimony emphasized every sacrifice he'd made, the long hours, the strategic risks, the brilliance that had turned modest beginnings into significant fortune. My contributions were dismissed with contempt. She organized dinner parties, Morrison summarized. She redecorated the house. She supervised the household staff. These are valuable activities, but they don't constitute financial contribution to the marital estate. The argument was designed to invoke the prenup's limitations, to paint me as a trophy wife who deserved exactly what she agreed to 15 years earlier when she supposedly had no bargaining power. I sat silently through all of it. Judge Patricia Holloway was 64 years old and had seen every divorce tactic imaginable. She listened to Morrison's presentation with an expression I couldn't quite read, attentive but not impressed, taking notes but not reacting. When he finished his dramatic conclusion about how Daniel deserved to keep the empire he built with his own hands, she simply nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Before we proceed to Mrs. Thornton's response, I'd like to review some documentation that was submitted with her financial disclosure." Daniel's attorney looked confused. "The prenuptial agreement is quite clear, Your Honor. Her financial disclosure should be straightforward. I'll be the judge of what's straightforward, Mr. Morrison." She turned to her clerk. "Please retrieve the Crawford Holdings LLC file from Mrs. Thornton's submission." Daniel frowned. Crawford was my maiden name. He hadn't heard it used in a professional context in 15 years. "I'm calling a 30-minute recess," Judge Holloway announced. "I need to review these documents more carefully." The recess lasted 47 minutes. I sat in the courthouse hallway with my attorney, Sandra Vance, a woman who'd specialized in protecting women's assets for 30 years. "They have no idea what's coming," she said quietly. "I know. Your husband's face when she reads the valuation. I've waited 15 years for that moment." Sandra studied me. "You could have told him anytime. Used your wealth to change the marriage. Why didn't you?" "Because I needed to know who he really was. Who he'd become without the performance." I watched the courtroom door. "Now I know. He's someone who would call his wife worthless in a public proceeding. Someone who'd try to leave me with $200,000 after 15 years and 3 children. And now? Now he learns what I've been building while he wasn't paying attention." When court resumed, Judge Holloway's expression had changed. She looked at me differently, not with pity, as she had during Morrison's presentation, but with something approaching respect. Perhaps even amusement. "Before we continue, I need to address some information in Mrs. Thornton's financial disclosure that Mr. Morrison's team appears to have overlooked." Daniel shifted in his seat. Mrs. Thornton submitted documentation under her maiden name, Evelyn Crawford, regarding business holdings separate from the marital estate. "I've spent the recess reviewing these documents." "Your Honor," Morrison interrupted, "whatever small investments she may have are irrelevant to the main proceeding. I'll determine what's relevant." Judge Holloway opened a folder. Crawford Holdings LLC was established 19 years ago, before the marriage. It currently owns commercial real estate properties in 4 states, including 6 strip malls, 4 office buildings, 2 apartment complexes, and a mixed-use development in Austin, Texas. The courtroom had gone silent. According to the certified appraisal submitted, these properties have a combined value of approximately $47 million. Morrison's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The LLC generates annual rental income of approximately $3.2 million after expenses. Mrs. Thornton, or rather, Ms. Crawford, has been the sole owner and operator throughout the marriage. Daniel's face had gone white. "That's not possible," he managed. "She doesn't." "Evelyn, what is this?" "It's my business," I said quietly. "The business I built while you were building yours." "But you were at home. With the children. Planning parties." "I was also managing a real estate portfolio. Acquiring properties. Working with attorneys and accountants and property managers." I met his eyes. "You never asked. You assumed you were the only one capable of building something valuable." Morrison was frantically flipping through his own copy of my disclosure. "Your Honor, we weren't informed. The disclosure was submitted according to proper procedure," Judge Holloway noted. Mrs. Thornton followed all required protocols. "Your team's failure to review it thoroughly is not the court's concern. But the prenuptial agreement addresses marital assets and Mrs. Thornton's claims to Mr. Thornton's business. It does not address Mrs. Thornton's separate property, which she maintained throughout the marriage without commingling." The judge almost smiled. "Your client sought to limit his wife's access to his assets. He succeeded. He simply didn't realize she had assets of her own that required no access." Daniel fired Morrison in the courthouse hallway. I watched through the window as they argued, as Morrison gestured defensively while Daniel's face cycled through rage and disbelief. Their entire strategy had been built on the assumption that I was powerless, dependent, deserving of whatever scraps they chose to offer. The assumption was catastrophically wrong. The divorce proceedings continued with a new dynamic. Daniel's replacement attorney was more cautious, more thorough, more aware that opposing counsel might have surprises. But the fundamental reality had shifted. I wasn't fighting for assets. I was negotiating from strength. My separate property was entirely mine, $47 million built before and during the marriage but never commingled with marital funds. Daniel had no claim to it, just as the prenup had ensured I had limited claim to his. But the marital assets, the house, the joint accounts, the pension funds, were subject to negotiation. And my position as a multimillionaire in my own right gave me leverage Daniel had never anticipated. The final settlement reflected the new reality. Daniel kept Thornton Capital Partners, his empire, minus the settlement payments for child support and maintenance that the court deemed appropriate given his income and our children's established lifestyle. I kept Crawford Holdings and all properties, plus primary custody of our 3 children, plus the family home, which I'd secretly loved and which Daniel had always seen as just another asset to liquidate. The prenup's $200,000 limitation was found inapplicable. It had addressed my claims to his business, not equitable distribution of marital property. I received far more than he'd planned to give me, though far less than I could have demanded. But I didn't need his money. I had my own. The revelation changed more than the divorce settlement. Our social circle, the clients, the friends, the connections Daniel had cultivated for 15 years, reacted to the news with fascination. The quiet housewife had been quietly building a fortune larger than many of their own. "How did you manage it?" one of Daniel's former clients asked me at a charity event months later. "Running a real estate company while raising 3 kids and managing his household?" I didn't sleep much, I admitted. And I had excellent help: nannies, housekeepers, property managers. The dinner parties Daniel thought defined my contribution? Those took maybe 20 hours a month. I had plenty of time left over. He really never knew. He never asked. He assumed I spent my days shopping and lunching, because that's what he expected a trophy wife to do. I sipped my champagne. I let him assume. It seemed easier than explaining that I was building something he'd have resented. Would he have? Absolutely. Daniel needed to be the successful one. The provider. The empire builder. My success would have threatened everything he believed about himself. And now? Now he knows. And he has to live with it. The children adapted to the divorce better than I'd feared. Teenagers are resilient, and mine had always had a closer relationship with me than with their father. They understood, perhaps better than Daniel realized, the dynamics that had shaped our family. "Did you always plan to leave him?" my daughter asked one evening, months after the settlement. "No. I hoped the marriage would improve. Hoped he'd remember why we fell in love." I paused. "But I always planned to be able to leave if I needed to. That's different." The secret business? The business was mine. Something that was purely me, not Daniel's wife or the kid's mother or the hostess at parties. I smiled. I never planned to reveal it dramatically in court. That part just happened. But you're glad it did? I'm glad he knows now. Glad everyone knows. Glad I do and have to pretend that organizing dinner parties was the full extent of my capabilities. Daniel remarried within 2 years. His new wife, not the secretary, who moved on to someone wealthier, is 20 years younger. And genuinely content to be what I only pretended to be, a trophy wife whose value lies in appearance and social facilitation. I wish them well. Genuinely. Daniel wanted a particular kind of partner, and he's finally found one. I wanted a partner who would see me as an equal, who would take interest in my work as well as his own, who would share responsibilities rather than delegating them. I never found that in my marriage. But I built something else instead. Crawford Holdings is worth $68 million now. 3 years post-divorce, I've expanded significantly, adding a hotel property in Florida and a warehouse complex in Arizona. The business has become my primary focus now that the children are older and the performance of Housewife is no longer required. I've also started a foundation, funding scholarships for women in commercial real estate, a field still dominated by men who assume women belong at home. The irony of financing it with money built while I was supposedly just a housewife isn't lost on me. People still ask how I did it. How I maintained 2 separate identities for 15 years, the socialite wife and the real estate developer. How I kept $47 million secret from a husband who thought he knew everything about our finances. The answer is simpler than they expect. Daniel never looked. He assumed he knew who I was because he decided who I should be. The dinner party planner. The decorating enthusiast. The woman who existed to support his ambitions and reflect his success. I performed that role because it served my purposes, gave me freedom, kept him comfortable, allowed me to build without interference. Every dinner party I planned, every social obligation I fulfilled, bought me time and space for the work that actually mattered to me. He saw what he expected to see. I built an empire in his blind spot. The courtroom revelation remains the defining moment. Judge Holloway's voice, calm and clear, these properties have a combined value of approximately $47 million. Morrison's sputtering confusion. Daniel's white-faced disbelief. The entire narrative of our marriage, the successful husband, the decorative wife, collapsing in real time. She was just a housewife, Morrison had said. The judge had pulled my file and discovered something different. I'm not just a housewife anymore. I'm not just anything. I'm a real estate developer, a mother, a philanthropist, a woman who built her fortune in silence and revealed it when silence was no longer strategic. Daniel spent 15 years assuming he was the provider. He was wrong. Daniel spent 15 years assuming I needed him. He was wrong. Daniel spent 15 years assuming his empire was the only one in our marriage. He was spectacularly wrong. She organized dinner parties, Morrison had sneered. Yes. I organized dinner parties. I also organized $47 million in commercial real estate, a team of property managers and attorneys, and the most satisfying courtroom revelation in my attorney's 30-year career. I was never just anything. Daniel should have asked what I did with the rest of my time,